Welcome to Dementia Air, a content channel devoted solely to exploring topics related to dementia. Dementia Air is a production of Beyond Dementia Coalition, a not-for-profit 501c3 which seeks to reduce stigma and help all of us not only recognize but also accept, assist, and embrace people living with dementia as valued and beloved members of the community. See the person beyond the disease. Hello, my name is Bruce Leyton, and I am your Dementia Air podcast host. And joining me today is Cloud Conrad. Hello, Cloud.
Hi, Bruce.
Cloud is a dementia caregiver, a trainer, mentor, educational program designer, and public speaker. And you were a caregiver to your dad, Stuart, and your mom, Mary Ann, both of whom lived with dementia.
That's
I'm,
right.
I'm giving that as background. None of this is an appeal to authority in any way. I think you, every time I hear you talk, and that's why I'm glad you're here, you offer a very unique perspective on the subject matter as a caregiver, educator, and trainer. Today, we're talking about why early diagnosis of dementia matters and why the road to that diagnosis isn't always obvious to the people who need help most. And with that, Cloud, first question. So, why is dementia, first of all, so hard to talk about? And how do we overcome the emotional barriers that often exist and open the door to what I'll call a practical and actionable next steps?
Thank you, Bruce. There's a great deal of stigma around the idea of dementia, around the topic of dementia, around the disease itself. And I think the stigma is born from misunderstanding of the disease and therefore the person who has the disease. And the stigma is nurtured by the archetypes that we've all been taught. In a previous series, one of your interviews with Mary Caldwell and Kim Franklin on the subject of caregiving, Mary referenced the stigma, the archetype of the person over in the corner in the wheelchair drooling. And we think of that, or we think about the person with dementia who does inappropriate things in public, like exposing themselves. And while those things are possible with dementia, because dementia is much more than just memory loss, those symptoms, those outward displays aren't really representative of the progression of dementia, in most people. There are changes in memory, certainly, but there's changes in behavior and thinking too. But also they happen so gradually that the changes that we see in a person, and the progression moves so slowly from day to day that the people around the person experiencing those changes tend to normalize from one day to the next. And because there's not very much change from one day to the next, it's hard oftentimes for people close to that person to even recognize that something is going on to begin with. And then because it is, a scary topic for most people, then the common response is one of deflection and dismissal and denial. It's easy to run away from the problem, but the irony is that the safest response is the one that feels the riskiest. And that's the one that is leaning in, the one that is harnessing curiosity about the disease, to overcome that fear and focus instead on curiosity. Fear creates that wall, Bruce, I think, and curiosity breaks that plane with a door. And knowledge helps you open that door, to see and understand what's on the other side.
Let's add to that knowledge that you just mentioned, but and let's take a step back to changes in memory and thinking or behavior. You touched on that for just a second. So when somebody notices changes in memory, thinking, or behavior in themselves or someone they love, the first questions that are usually asked are simple, but they're kind of heavy questions, at least as I've experienced it. And the number one question is this normal? And then should I get tested? So is that something you can dive into, do you think?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, the leaning in to whatever somebody's noticing to even say, is this normal? Or it's not necessarily should I get tested? I mean, that's kind of taking a leap that is unnecessary, and we'll get into why in just a minute. But to go back to your question, is it normal? And maybe the better word is this natural, normal, has a lot of baggage that comes with it. But is this part of the natural aging process? For example, it's normal that as we age, we get a little bit forgetful. We might lose someone's name. We might miss a doctor's appointment. Those are also the earliest changes that we might see if someone has dementia. So how do you know? Should I be expecting this, or is this something more, maybe something more serious? And I want to first say, I'm going to explain that, but I want to first say, back to this fear versus curiosity. If you do notice those things in yourself or a loved one, it could be, let's not leap to the idea that it's dementia. It could be one of three things happening. It could be part of the natural aging process, like a senior moment. It could be something else that's unrelated to dementia, but is a condition, a medical condition, that's causing those symptoms, but a treatable condition not related to dementia. And then the third option is that it is a dementia-related progression. So people automatically jump to door number three there, and it's important to stress it could easily be something else that's happening. And hopefully that is enough to tampen down someone's fear to make them pay attention. How can you tell if what you're noticing is part of that natural aging process? There's three ways that I like to think about this. And there's an acronym that helps people remember. It's a mnemonic device, really. It's RIT. So can the person recover? That's the R. Let's say you're in the grocery store and there's someone behind you, and you worked on a committee in the neighborhood last year. You know this person, you've been in their house, you know their children, but you can't come up with their name. When you get home from the store, if you finally remember that person's name, then you recovered from that. So that's probably natural aging. The second one, is it happening infrequently? If it's happening infrequently, not enough to affect daily life, then it's probably natural aging. So that's the I is infrequently. And the third one, the T, is it typical for the person? So if the person bounced a check last week, but they bounced a check 2 months ago and they bounced two checks last year, is that a cause for concern? It's not different for that person. They've bounced checks before intermittently. So it's probably normal aging, natural aging, rather, that's going on in those instances. If what we observe in the person doesn't meet those three criteria, then it may be time for some exploratory work to see what's going on, what's
Yeah.
the underlying cause.
So exploratory work, and I'm assuming exploratory work might include a diagnostic path. There's so much information out there, and John Nesbitt said it in his book Megatrends, and this is back in the 80s. So he said, we're drowning in information, but starved for knowledge. To me, that's so true, and it's just compounded so many times in this day and age. So, can you help the people feel overwhelmed and help them channel that curiosity and walk them through the diagnostic path for dementia, including maybe some of the key waypoints that they might encounter along the way?
Yeah, and the first thing that I want to impress on listeners, Bruce, is that when we think of that diagnostic path in the context of dementia, I just laid out three options a minute ago. It could be natural aging, it could be a different condition that's not related to dementia, or it could be dementia. That we pause and take the time to look at this is not the path to a dementia diagnosis, but a diagnostic exploration that could lead us in a number of directions. It is as much to learn that the signs that we see in a person are related to their hearing impairment or related to an interaction between two drugs that they take that used to be fine together or a nutritional deficiency. There are so many things that could be discovered about a person's health through this path. This could be a number of things. Let's not jump to dementia.
And if we look at diagnosis, it doesn't necessarily just belong in the context of the medical community, right? As I'm hearing you talk. So conversely, um, you're reluctant to link dementia to diagnostic path, but in the same respect, diagnosis doesn't mean necessarily and isn't in just in the domain of the medical field. You can be, as a responsible party, follow that RIT kind of diagnosis method, if you will, on as part of your dyad, if you will, caregiver, person living with dementia, or maybe not. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
It's incumbent upon the people in the closest circle to be the first one to hold up a flag, but you know, this is a yellow flag, not a red flag, I suppose.
Okay.
There's something that deserves our curiosity, but let's not jump to conclusions that we don't have enough information to reach yet.
Okay.
I want to just quickly say that, and this goes to the curiosity piece, because we would be looking at, as we're talking about this exploratory work, this diagnostic exploration, because we're going to be engaging multiple specialties, different clinicians, and doctors potentially are going to be involved in this process. And some of the tests take a number of days or weeks to return the results. The diagnostic exploration process can last 12 to 24 months. In the case of dementia, fortunately, because of the advances in research, we're starting to see that window compress a little bit. But it's really important to understand this is a long process with numerous visits. It's not a one and done. And because it takes so long, it's important to start that process early. And that's because of these advances, we are able to hone in on dementia more quickly and more accurately than ever before. I just want to come back to one point that I want everyone to take away. If nothing else, this relates to everyone, whether or not you notice a sign of potential cognitive change in yourself. And that is to have a cognitive wellness exam. We've probably all heard about it, drawing hands on a clock, counting back from 100, remembering words in a list. The cognitive wellness exam is free if you are 65 or older. It is covered by private pay insurers and Medicare and Medicaid. The cognitive wellness exam is your first true glimpse into what may be happening cognitively. The cognitive wellness exam, even if you don't notice any cognitive changes, establishes a baseline of cognitive health, your cognitive profile in this moment. Remember, Bruce, and a little bit ago, I was saying how if it is dementia, the changes happen so gradually day to day that it's difficult to notice. If you have the cognitive wellness exam and you have a picture in time, a snapshot of today of what your cognitive wellness score is, next year when you go back to your doctor and you think things might be different, but you're not really sure and you don't know how different, you take the cognitive wellness exam again, you compare it to your baseline, you have a better idea of how, if and how rapidly your cognitive changes may be unfolding. So I
Hmm.
want to make sure that we talk about that. It's the first line of defense. There's research that shows that 98% of PCPs, primary care physicians, know they're supposed to offer this to their patients 65 or over, but for whatever reason, only 48% of them do. So the other thing that everybody I hope will take away is you should be the one to ask in order to make sure you have access to that cognitive wellness exam. Be sure to put it on your list to speak with your primary care
Yeah.
physician about.
Yeah. And I also just want to add that, you talk about the 98% and they know, but only 48% actually deliver the test, and nobody's at fault there really. They're operating under tremendously difficult circumstances. Yeah,
Yes,
their training and their judgment and everything that they've learned in developing a relationship with the patient and what's medically best for that individual defies the logic of the modern health system, which kind of resembles an industrial assembly line, if you will. And there's benefit to that, right? It creates a repeatable, measurable, predictable, and optimized kind of a process, if you will.
right.
But yeah, it's not that they don't care, but it does clash to some degree with the relational, interpretive, kind of the humanistic nature of medicine, or what we at least hope for. So, as you said, you got to ask for it. Make sure you ask for it. It's nobody's
Make
fault.
sure you ask
Yeah,
for it.
yeah.
It's nobody's fault. Yeah, I'm glad that you stressed that. This is the progress, particularly with dementia, the progress that we're making is so important, but it doesn't, progress comes with side effects too. So, anyway, so this is not meant to be critical of our medical system. That's not the purpose of this podcast or our intent in general. So I'm glad that you said that.
Yep. So, go ahead. Why don't you start to talk about some of the innovations and um,
Yeah.
in this space
Um,
in terms of therapeutics and the considerations that might be weighed with respect to that.
Right. So remember, I mentioned my dad, and we only got his definitive diagnosis on autopsy. Well, now we are at the point where we are researching biomarkers, so things that are within our body, to discover their predictive abilities with regard to someone's development of a diagnosis, not only their likelihood, but the existence of the pathology of dementia in their bodies. This means that we don't have to wait for an autopsy, which is awfully invasive and a little late in the conversation, but but B, that we have the potential to have this information when it truly is actionable to us, which is at the beginning of the progression of dementia. So quickly, there's 5 phases of dementia, if you will. The first is the person has the pathology of dementia in their body and their brain, but they are preclinical. They are not showing any symptoms yet. The second is mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, where the symptoms might be noticeable to the person and maybe um, their closest loved ones, but it's not really apparent to the rest of the world. Then there's early stage dementia, where the person is still living independently or nearly entirely independently, and middle stage dementia as they lose their independence, and then late stage dementia when they are entirely dependent on other folks. What we know about the drugs is that they are most effective in the earliest stages of dementia. Now, let me back up for a minute. Alzheimer's was first chronicled in 1906. It took 90 years to get to the first drug that was aimed at the symptoms of dementia. That first drug was Aricept. It was aimed at the symptoms of dementia. This isn't the best comparison, but an aspirin can alleviate pain, but it's not really treating the underlying causes of that pain. Aricept can alleviate some of the symptoms of dementia, but it's not really addressing the underlying cause. So it took 90 years to get to that point where there was an aspirin, if you will, something to address a symptom. 30 years later, here we are in 2026. We now have drugs that are aimed at the actual pathology, drugs that are aimed at eliminating the plaques and tangles in the brain that have caused dementia. And so it's incredibly exciting that we have picked up this much pace in just the last 30 years, not only those drugs, but the biomarkers that I mentioned to discover the need for those drugs.
And can I just
Well,
a quick question?
yeah,
These are FDA approved, right? We're not talking about just clinical trials.
that is true. These are FDA approved drugs. They have been proven in clinical trial to work most effectively in the earliest stages in the mild cognitive impairment and the earliest stages of dementia. So going back to the fact that we talked about, it could be 24 months, probably not anymore, but it's a long time. The diagnostic exploratory process is a long one. So we know that there's a closing window because dementia is a progressive disease. It is constantly advancing. If the window of efficacy is closing as we proceed through our progression of dementia, then so is our window of eligibility. The drugs don't work well unless they're administered in the earliest stages of dementia, and therefore one would not be able to get a prescription for these drugs unless they were in the earliest stages of dementia. And one would not be able to get a prescription without a diagnosis.
Okay.
Now, let me say one thing. So I just kind of laid down that hammer for you about there's a there's a finite window of time. You've got to hurry up. Um, get moving. You're losing your agency. You're losing your any control that you may have over dementia if you don't act now. And I just want to, that is true. It comes off awfully strong. I want to go back to something that I said in the beginning, which is, and I'll call it the rule of threes. So the symptoms that you've observed in yourself or a loved one could be one of three things, as we established in the beginning. Could be natural aging, could be some other condition, could be dementia. Could be one of three things. Of those that do have MCI, mild cognitive impairment, that do get that diagnosis, only one in three of those will go on to develop dementia in the next 5 years. And then the last one is that so dementia, Alzheimer's in particular, is a disease of age. But even thinking about our oldest Americans, those who are 85 or older, only one in three has dementia.
Yeah.
So
So these are risk factors, right? They're not diagnosis. So age is a risk factor, but doesn't necessarily manifest in everybody in the same way.
exactly. And
Yeah.
even MCI, it increases your risk factor of dementia, but it doesn't necessarily advance
Yep.
to dementia.
Yep. So tell me, is dementia preventable?
This is another thing, Bruce, that's so exciting about where we are with the research. There are more and more studies that are demonstrating that there is a correlation between some of our lifestyle choices and reduced risk for dementia, specifically Alzheimer's. And this is something really exciting. There are parts of dementia that are outside of our control. Gosh, there's parts of life that are outside our control. There's parts of aging that are outside of our control. But it's so exciting to know that there are lifestyle choices, they're called lifestyle interventions in the medical world, that we can choose to lower our risk of dementia. And they are actually things that we hear that we're supposed to be doing to lower our risk of other health conditions. So the good news is it's the same list of things you should be doing anyway. And so we're not adding more to your plate. It's just another reason to do the things that you know in your heart you should be doing for your overall health anyway. What do I mean by that? Specifically, things that we do that are good for our heart are good for our brain and lower our risk for dementia. So a heart healthy diet is good for our brain. Exercise that's good for our heart is good for our brain. And in addition to that, your listeners have probably heard about the importance of cognitive stimulation, cognitive exercise, and that can look like a variety of things. The last one there is social activity, remaining connected to people, staying actively engaged with people, reducing isolation.
Yeah. And I've seen it. Thank you for that. I'm going to focus on social activity because I've seen it happen and play out in an active adult community where I am, where those who are definitely demonstrating symptoms of dementia, that they are left kind of it's I don't know if it's the stigma or what, but the social interaction comes to a grinding halt, and people that are in our midst kind of are left to recede into the background and not drawn into it. So I think there's an obligation also on the flip side to make people aware, connect, and continue to embrace them as part of the community.
I'm so glad you said that. I noticed this with my stepfather, my mother's second husband. He stopped playing golf when the others in his foursome started criticizing his ability to score, accurately. He didn't want to be outed, so to speak, as someone with cognitive issues, so he quit playing. And then we stopped asking that person to lunch because we're afraid we won't know what to say anymore if they do something that is unexpected or say something that's unexpected.
Yeah.
And
God.
I want to, there's a renowned dementia expert. She comes to her dementia work by way of occupational therapy, decades and decades. Her name is Teepa Snow, Teepa, Teepa Snow. And she's designed the GEMS model of dementia's progression to describe the phases that we would see as someone's Alzheimer's unfolds, particularly. And she's bucking the system, the traditional numeric models of measuring dementia's progression run from 0 to 6 or 1 to 7. And her idea is that people with dementia are human. They are precious. They are rare. They should be cherished. They are not numbers. And the last gem, so each of her 7 stages has a gem associated with it. And in the final stages of dementia, she calls that stage the pearl stage. And it's so beautiful because think about an oyster. We're not attracted to the oyster for its appearance. The shell is ugly, the shell is dull, and frankly, it's sharp to the touch. It could cut us. But if we're curious and we're careful, we can pry open that oyster. And when we do, we discover the most miraculous treasure inside. And this is the idea with the way that we treat those living with dementia. I hope everyone, it goes back to that curiosity, to twist the shell, to open it, to crack it, to find the beauty, the gem, the pearl, or the delicious oyster that is inside there. And I just love that idea. And one of the things that excites me so much about Beyond Dementia Coalition and the organization's mission statement is it captures that beautifully. The mission says that through community awareness and dementia education, the organization seeks to help people living with dementia feel like the beloved and valued members of the community that they are.
Yeah,
And none of that would be possible, Bruce, without curiosity to crack that shell.
absolutely. Thank you for that, Cloud. So, Cloud, I think we've covered a lot of territory. I want to thank you for being on the podcast. You,
Thank you.
as we said up front, you most definitely have a unique perspective as a caregiver, educator, and trainer. But I think most importantly, there are those in the community who you have touched, and I know that those same people are very appreciative of the work that you do. So once again, thank you for participating on today's podcast, and thank you for the work that you do in the community. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you for your work on this podcast. It's really an important way to help people engage with this subject.
My pleasure. Beyond Dementia Coalition is on a quest to close the dementia preparedness gap we face. To get there, we sure could use your support as a donor or a volunteer. To get involved, please go to beyonddementiacoalition.org. All donations are tax deductible, and be sure to subscribe to our mailing list to receive our monthly newsletter in your inbox, where we'll share new podcasts, fact sheets, webinars, blogs, and other dementia-related content. This is Dementia Air. See the person beyond the disease.